Good day. Our program will begin in just a moment. Good day. Our program will begin in just a moment. Good day. Welcome to Advocacy Anywhere, Israel at War, a series featuring programs surrounding the evolving situation in Israel and the region, understanding the impact around the world, and sharing action items you can take from wherever you are. Late last night, Israel launched a precise preemptive strikes against Iran in Operation Rising Lion. The attacks come after tensions in the region have been steadily building. Joining us today to provide insights in these fast-moving events are AJC Jerusalem Director Lt. Colonel Reserve Avital Leibovich and AJC Chief Impact and Operations Officer Casey Kustin. After we hear from Avital and Casey, we will take your questions. You may email your questions to questions@ajc.org. Questions is plural, or you can use the Q&A feature in Zoom. Before we begin, we'll hear from AJC CEO Ted Deutsch. Ted, the floor is yours.
Thanks. Thank you very much, and it's good to be with everyone. We wanted to pull this together as quickly as we possibly could. We know that this is a very challenging moment for all of us. It's a challenging moment for the state of Israel. This is a moment that was a long time coming, as I'm sure Avital will address. We are very fortunate to be able to turn to Avital and our team in Israel for their unique insight. We are grateful for all that they are doing. Everyone across AJC, all of my colleagues and I who engage in this work have been in contact with officials in both the Israeli and American governments. And I'm glad that we have the opportunity to gather together as a community. So many of our AJC family members are in Israel beyond Avital and our team in Jerusalem. There are so many leaders that I have heard from who are in Israel for any number of reasons. We're thinking of them. We are standing with them as we stand with the government of Israel, the men and women of the IDF, and all of our brothers and sisters in Israel. Before I turn it over, I will just note that I'm joining you today in Washington from the Nova exhibit as it opens here today, where Steve Witkoff will be joining in about an hour. Behind me is the sign that has become really synonymous with Nova, which is we will dance again. You can't really see it, and what's happening now in Israel and the strikes that Israel are making to defend Israel, the Jewish people, and ultimately the West is a tremendous step to ensuring that we will indeed dance again. With that, Casey, I'll turn it over to you. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you, Ted. We appreciate you joining us today. I'm Casey Custoen, AJC's Chief Impact and Operations Officer. I'm joined today by Avital Leibovich, our AJC Jerusalem Director. Avital, thank you for being here. So our audience knows, Avital is also a lieutenant colonel in the reserves, and she was already called up last night, so she joins us from reserve duty. Later, we'll also be joined by colleagues from AJC's Center for New Middle East. I want to step back just for a moment to remind everyone how we got here. The United States entered into negotiations with Iran again in April over its nuclear program. 5 rounds of negotiations had been completed. A 6th was scheduled to begin this week. Throughout negotiations, it became clear that Iran was continuing its illicit nuclear work. It's culminated in a shocking report from the International Atomic Energy Agency, which revealed a sharp escalation in Iran's enrichment program. Its uranium stockpile had grown. It had continued to obstruct IAEA inspectors, and the revelation of a previously undeclared nuclear site. In a somewhat unprecedented action, early yesterday morning, U.S. time, the Board of Governors at the IAEA passed a censure led by Europeans. It's important to note that this was led by the Europeans because despite any current issues that we hear from some European governments and their posture towards Israel's war on Hamas, they recognize that Iran is a global security threat. So Avital, obviously yesterday, everything was shut down immediately in Israel. In-person Shabbat services were canceled, non-essential work was canceled in anticipation of something. And, you know, time and time again, we've seen, especially since October 7th, the Israeli people are so resilient. And before we talk about the specifics of last night's operation, what's the mood like in Israel today? How are you doing? How is the country coping with what is potentially now an unknown few days as we await reaction from Iran?
Thank you, Casey. And first of all, I'd like to thank everybody for their support. And definitely, I feel the part of being all one family kind of aspect. So thank you for that. Last night, at a few minutes before 3 a.m., which was actually seems like a continuation of today, actually. The entire country was woken up to a unique kind of siren. Automatically, you know, we thought that this was another Houthi attack because in the last couple of weeks, we have a Houthi missile directed at Israel almost every day. But this was just a way of the government to notify the special emergency situation that we have now in Israel. And for that, people needed to make sure that they're right next to their shelters. And that's why they were waking up at 3 a.m. Last night. So what does this special kind of situation entail? So first of all, people need to know where the shelter is. People need to make sure they have sufficient water in the shelter or other kinds of food and other kinds of maybe electricity, batteries, things like that. Second of all the major gatherings across the country have been postponed. For example, as you know, the Pride Parade that we have in Tel Aviv every year is the second largest in the world, and it was supposed to take place today. And of course, that has been canceled, as well as all the theater and movie and the recreation centers, schools, kindergartens, everything has been closed. People were basically asked to stay near the shelter. Of course, there was no really restriction on movement. I mean, you can go to the supermarket and buy whatever you need and come back, but it's not smart to go now to the beach and get a suntan because there are no shelters really in the beach. So I can tell you from my own experience, just driving back here just a few minutes ago, the streets are pretty empty. The roads are pretty empty. Most of the people are staying at home because obviously there is tension in the air. A lot of families have kids in the army, like I do, and spouses in reserve duty, like I do. And therefore, you can feel the tension in the air, but you're right. Israelis are resilient. I would just end by saying that I think there was an overall majority of support in this attack in Iran. The Israeli people have been hearing and dreading the Iranian threat for decades. So I think most of the country is pretty united in, you know, getting the situation solved once and for all. And that's another asset for us as a people that we come together.
So on that last point, it's not been a secret that Israel has always been prepping for the potential of a military operation against Iran's nuclear program if the threat became so imminent. Before I ask you to get into some specifics about the operation itself, can you discuss Israel's posture towards Iran over the past few weeks and what factors go into making the decision to actually operationalize those plans?
Yeah, it's a great question. The decision was actually taken more than just a few weeks. The turning point was Israel's operation in Lebanon vis-a-vis Hezbollah. So, as you know, Israel, after the Pagers operation in July, decided to step its activities towards Hezbollah and basically eliminated almost all of the senior military leadership of Hezbollah, as well as some of the best military assets they had. Now, this actually created a huge problem for Iran because Hezbollah was a loyal proxy for decades, since the 80s. And when they lost their capability to represent Iran versus Israel, then Iran needed to take some measures. Add to this what happened a month later, December, when the Assad regime fell and crashed in Syria and Jolani came in. And as you know, Assad was another proxy of Iran. So basically this Shiite axis, as we call it here, which was represented for decades by Bashar Assad and by Hezbollah, was actually shattered to pieces. And in order to make sure that the Shiite axis still reserves the edge, Iran began a process which speeded up its nuclear efforts. And you mentioned the IAEA report. That has to do with it, with some of the monitoring, some of the findings they found. But the most concerning thing, because we usually speak about enriching the enrichment of uranium, but it was more than that this time. The intelligence in Israel noted that Iran actually began a weaponizing upgrade of the systems. In other words, it prepared weapons that could carry nuclear bombs. And that was a different level of progress in this nuclear aspirations. And that's the reason why already in November, the IDF, the Mossad, the other security apparatus in Israel were directed to begin and compile some sort of an operation, a plan with different layers of plans as we can discuss later, and be ready when the time comes. And the time has come now. And we can also discuss why it came now and not different time. But it really started already in November.
So as you mentioned, we have long sort of made that distinction between the capability to then deliver a nuclear weapon. And what we have seen in open source reporting at this point is that it wasn't just nuclear sites that were targeted. There were ballistic missile bases targeted, air defense systems, senior military leadership. Can you talk about the decision to go after that sort of wide range of targets in order to address the broader strategic security issues for Israel that exist with sort of the all-encompassing, as we say, it's not just the nuclear, it's the destabilizing activities in the region, the threats to the broader Middle East as well?
Sure. Before I go into that, I want to describe to our viewers that actually we had four possibilities of a military operation. By the way, in Israel, we don't call it a military operation. It's a war. It's a war with Iran, which has different connotations, different implications, different scale, but we call it here a war with Iran. So there were four possibilities for this war. Possibility number one was that Israel would act on its own completely without the United States. Possibility number two was that Israel would act independently, but with coordination with the US. That's where we are now. This is what we are seeing today. The third option would be that there will be a mutual military operation, US and Israel vis-a-vis Iran. And the fourth option was that only the US would attack Iran. So these were the four options. So when Israel came and planned the different types of targets, different kind of operations, it had to take into consideration these four options. So as I said, we are in full coordination with the US. It was given prior notice to this. By the way, the Iranians were misled in a different way. So they were obviously surprised. But then the targets that you're asking about, you're right to say that there are different types of targets and what is the rationale behind that. So you mentioned the ballistic missiles. When the JCPOA was signed in 2015, 2014, 2015, it left out the whole ballistic missile issue. What is the ballistic missile? Ballistic missile is an advanced missile without getting into too much military details, but it's an advanced missile that can carry hundreds, many hundreds of kilograms of explosives. And imagine that if Iran would have nuclear weapons, what else it could carry? It could fly a very long distance. In our case, it's 1,200 kilometers, and create huge damage. And we know that Iran in the past, in October, in April, has attacked us with ballistic missiles. So obviously, Iran has a huge arsenal of ballistic missiles, which Israel sees as an immediate threat, and this was one of the targets. The other part of the targets had to do with the military targets, with the military officials, generals, commanders of basically the Revolutionary Guards. This is the notorious body in the Iranian regime who sets the policy vis-a-vis Israel. By the way, it also controls the funding of the government of Iran and decides which part of the population should get benefits and which not. And I'm sure you know who gets the benefits at the end of the day. It's not the average person in the street. And here I'm happy to say that the achievements were quite remarkable. For example, the commander of the Revolutionary Guards was eliminated, his deputy, the Air Force commander, and basically we're talking about dozens, with an S at the end, of senior level military commanders at the Revolutionary Guards and other military parts of Iran. And it was a very accurate attack. In other words, if you had the possibility to see the pinpoint strikes, which hits a certain window in a certain apartment, in a certain building, you must have seen that the building is standing, but only a specific apartment was targeted. This is also an indication to the many years of intelligence that has been collected by the intelligence apparatus here in Israel. Now, there are two additional types of targets. The first one is an economic type. For example, the oil refineries in Iran, and we know how desperate Iran is to receive oil and to buy oil from China, from other countries. And the second one is the current politicians, the political echelon. And Israel, as you saw, chose at this point of time not to go to these two types of targets, but we are still just in the beginning. So other options, of course, are still on the table.
Can you give us an assessment, Avital, of how degraded you think Iran's capabilities are now? For example, we've seen reporting that the Natanz facility was targeted, which is the largest uranium enrichment facility in Iran. But it seems that the underground facility at Fordo was not targeted. Can you talk specifically about kind of what the degradation of both the nuclear and military capabilities are from what you know at this point?
Yeah, so first of all, I know, and I also was witnessing some of the attacks when I was earlier today in the base. But I do want to mention before just a warning. Iran is putting out there a lot of misinformation. Obviously, it wants to present itself as a strong military with strong capabilities. By doing so, it actually misinforms the public. I want to give you an example. Well, the Iranians have three options to attack Israel, three types of, I would say, tools to attack Israel. The first one are the drones, and I'm talking about, of course, about explosive drones. These are drones that once they take off from Iran, they can be tracked. And it would take them a couple of hours to reach Israel. Earlier this morning, they launched more than 100 drones, but they made a public announcement saying that this has nothing to do with them. Obviously, almost all of the drones have been intercepted, so this is a bitter failure. And of course, they have an interest of spreading falsehoods. The second type of weapon that Iran can use against us, and they still haven't, but there is a high probability they will, are ballistic missiles, which we spoke about. When a ballistic missile leaves Iran, because it's such a long distance of 1,200 kilometers, then it takes a few hours to reach here. And the third part are cruise missiles. Cruise missiles can take something like, I'm sorry, the ballistic missiles is 10 minutes and the cruise missiles about 2 hours. So these are the three types of weapons which Iran has that can target Israel at this point of time. But I do want to say this, we are just in the beginning. I mean, it seems like, I don't know, a week has passed since 3 a.m., but in reality, this is really the beginning because Iran was in a huge shock and surprise. Imagine that the leadership of the military is gone, and now they need to reappoint substitutes. So these substitutes need to learn the military plans and fit into the shoes of their predecessors, and this takes time. So my assumption is, and my assessment is, that it will take them a bit of time, as we are seeing already, to step out of their shock. And once they will do that, they will be very eager to showcase their capabilities. Therefore, I do not rule out the fact that we will see here barrages of the two types of missiles which I mentioned. It can be in an hour, it can be tonight, it can be tomorrow, but I have no doubt that Iran will be eager to show achievements, and therefore they will continue and attack us here.
Do you expect a response in the interim from any of Iran's proxies in the region? It was interesting to see a statement come from the Lebanese government discouraging Hezbollah from getting involved. And obviously we know the Houthis have been firing missiles, particularly since the early May attack at the airport.
Right, so there are two types of this kind of reactions from proxies. It can be from the country. I mean, the country could be used as a platform to fire from, to launch from. And also the proxies themselves could decide that they are intervening and also standing by Iran. Now, I can tell you that today, 4 drones, explosive drones, were fired by Iran through Syria. So it wasn't the Jolani regime who fired those drones, but they used Syrian airspace to try and hit Israel. And the same happened from Lebanon. So right now, Hezbollah, if you ask me, doesn't have really motivation in any way to join this Iranian kind of operation or strikes against Israel because they are in a quite poor situation. After all, Israel quite crippled them from their launching capabilities, from their weapons, from other systems they had. Of course, in Hezbollah too, a lot of the senior leadership was eliminated as well. So why should they be a part of it? And the reason why Michel Aoun declared that he will not allow Lebanon to be a part of it was to send some sort of a message to Hezbollah that there is no interest. As for the other proxy, that was Bashar Assad, and of course he's gone. But again, Jolani doesn't have an army in Syria, and therefore Syrian airspace could be used as the platform against Israel.
I can already see there are many questions in the chat, so I want to make sure that we leave ample time for that. I want to bring in our other directors from our Center for New Middle East, AJC Abu Dhabi Director, Ambassador Mark Sievers, and our Deputy Director of the Center for New Middle East and Director of Middle East and North Africa Initiatives, Benji Rogers, just to broaden the conversation a little bit before we transition to Q&A. Mark, Benji, thanks for being with us as well. Mark, the Gulf states have also long seen Iran's nuclear program and their destabilization of the region as a threat to their own security. How are you gauging the public and perhaps private, if you can share, reactions to last night's attack?
Yeah, thanks, Casey. First thing I would say is here in Abu Dhabi today was very, very quiet. I was out and around a bit. It seemed normal, except maybe quieter than usual. All right, it's already summer and a lot of people have left and it's very hot and it's a Friday. But it did seem unusually quiet today. I think they're waiting to see what happens next. Publicly, both Saudi Arabia, the UAE, I believe Qatar as well, and there may be other statements I didn't see, have condemned the Israeli strikes on Iran. But I think that's largely an effort to shield themselves from an Iranian retaliation. I think privately, I'm not so sure about Saudi Arabia, but yeah, I think also in Saudi, they're secretly pleased. The more extensive the damage to the nuclear program, the better it is for them. But they also worry about Iran's retaliation because nobody knows. I mean, certainly Iran is likely to retaliate against the United States, but it has in the past threatened that it would retaliate against the Gulf states, or at least against those that it is seen as of having some relationship with Israel. So they're clearly worried about that. They're worried about shipping through the Strait of Hormuz, which Iran at times has threatened to mine and to blockade in the past, which would have an enormous economic impact. So there's, I think, some mixed feelings, and publicly they're not going to say anything in support of Israel. But I think the more successful these strikes prove to be in private, the happier they are.
You know, we saw back in April of 24, we saw some of the regional states step in to, as they would say, defend their own airspace from Iranian missiles and drones. Can we expect that to continue if there is a retaliation?
Well, at least in terms of the 100 drones that were fired earlier today, I know that there was some interception in Jordan. How much that was by U.S. or other third countries, and how much of it was Jordanian, I don't know. But I know that some of the drones were intercepted over Jordanian airspace. I think there's probably similar cooperation in the Gulf, but I don't have any specifics. And it's probably best not to talk about it too publicly because I'm sure they don't want to discuss. But yes, I think that is the case.
Can I just interrupt and say that I just got a message that the Houthis have fired to Israel a missile, and so sirens may be. I may have to run to shelter in a few minutes.
Stay safe, Avital. Benji, I want to turn to you for the U.S. perspective here, and you know, there's a lot of speculation happening on social media about the ongoing negotiations and what might have been sort of pre-planned to perhaps mislead the Iranians. Statements from President Trump that seemed earlier in the week to discourage or even oppose an imminent attack on Iran. Obviously, we now know that there has been coordination. Interesting statement very quickly coming from Secretary of State Marco Rubio last night, making it clear that Israel was acting unilaterally, and the U.S.'s focus was on protecting assets and personnel in the region. And then this morning, further comments from President Trump stating that he had been warning Iran that if they didn't make a deal, that military action would follow. In the same breath, also being clear that there is still space for a deal to be made. So, obviously we can't predict what will happen next on that side, but what do you think from a U.S. perspective? Where do you think the U.S. is headed on the diplomatic front? Obviously, we know that the U.S. will step in and continue to be deeply committed to Israel's self-defense in the face of any retaliatory attack. But on the diplomatic and political side, what comes next for the U.S.?
Thanks, Casey. It's a great question, and I'll start off by saying, honestly, we don't know. I think the number one issue right now from U.S. concerns is the 40,000 U.S. troops that are in the Middle East right now, that are stationed in the Middle East. You saw that mentioned in Secretary Rubio's comments last night. Clear that President Trump still wants to have some sort of diplomatic process, diplomatic engagement. In that tweet you mentioned, he also repeats this, and you hear this time and time again. No more, no more death, no more war. I think of the no more death, no more destruction. These are the words that he keeps saying from conversations with contacts at the White House, especially following President Trump's trip to the region. We heard a lot about U.S. desires, the administration's desires to get quiet in the region so that they can focus, and not just in the region, globally, so the U.S. can focus on their main adversary, which is China. The question of what is the future of diplomacy between Iran and the U.S., I think it's a big question mark, and I think it's a big question mark for a variety of reasons, most of which Avital hit on, which is this is start of day one of a multi-week operation, maybe multi-week war. We don't know where this is going. We don't know what the future of the Iranian regime is going to be right now. So there's a lot of unknowns right now. But from a policy perspective, I think what we have seen and what we have learned from past conflicts is it's always good to, when you give the hammer, to also have a way to come down. And I think that's what President Trump is maybe hinting at, that if the Iranians become sincere about wanting to negotiate, if they stop playing games, maybe there's a way forward. But that's speculation. I really don't know.
Thanks, Benji. I want to turn it back over to Claire to start our audience Q&A.
In the meantime, before Claire takes over, I'll just update that right now there are 47 communities in Israel, towns, cities, including Jerusalem, which are in shelter. When the missile leaves Yemen, which is a lot harder than Iran, it takes about 12 minutes until it reaches here. So in the beginning, we don't know exactly which area it will impact. So the relevant areas get this alert warning on the Homefront Command app, and now we know it's in the Jerusalem area and 40 other communities across.
And just another bit of breaking news. We've been alerted, and Avital, I don't know if you have anything further on this, that Israel is potentially hitting the Fordo site now.
What I want to say is that Israel never stopped for a minute. I mean, even though not everything is reported, and even though Iran may deny some of the information, the attacks have not stopped since 3 a.m., really have not stopped, with different ways, different tools. Some have not been exposed, not everything has been used. And Mossad is a part of it too, which I forgot to mention, because they also deserve a lot of credit. They have a lot of tools which they have been using. I'm not sure that eventually everything will be publicized, but I think you will get a taste, which will be, I think, a very good indication to the level of accuracy which derives from the level of intelligence that Israel has on the Revolutionary Guards and the different plants, nuclear plants and factories, not just the nuclear plants. We know the names, Fordo, Natanz, Qom, because they're the popular ones, and they're the ones who are shielded under meters and meters of concrete, all the way 40, 50 meters deep in the ground, maybe 80. But there are so many components to build a bomb, and these components are spread everywhere. And Iran is a huge country with 90 million people, with a huge desert area. And therefore, they store in such huge areas different components, even chips or even small components. And therefore, you need a huge and a very accurate amount of intelligence in order to be capable to intercept and to really harm the capabilities of Iran, which I'm sure 100% that at the end of this war, that will be the outcome.
Thank you. Claire, let's open it up.
Thanks, Casey. Avital, our first question is from Frank Brodsky and others who are asking, what will be the impact on the hostages, and will this change anything with respect to operations in Gaza?
No, so the operations in Gaza are continuing as usual. As you know, we have boots on the ground. We have 5 divisions in Gaza. The operations in Iran are mainly from the air, and maybe other things as well, but mainly from the air. So there's no impact between the two. As for the hostages, as you know, there was, I would say, a revised proposal of Hamas. Israel gave its answers on this revised proposal of Hamas 2 days ago. So now the ball is in Hamas's court, hoping that something will move. By the way, even the revised version does not mention the return of all the hostages. It mentions the return of 10 living hostages, 8 immediately, and then 60 days of a ceasefire, then additional 2, and a few more elements. But even that revised option does not mention all the 53 hostages.
Our next question is from Ray Termini for Mark and Benji. I'll start with you. Do you expect that Israel will be able to count on the cooperation of Jordan and Saudi Arabia or other partners in neutralizing Iranian attacks against Israel, or as partners in de-escalation?
I think, we just touched on that just a minute ago. There is some active cooperation in intercepting drones, and largely drones, and I would think probably cruise missiles. Ballistic missiles are another factor. Those are, I think, largely intercepted in the sky over Israel, not en route. You can't operate the same way. Yeah, I think so. It may depend on how long this lasts, but for now, at the initial phase, that does appear to be the case.
And I'll just add to that. I think Mark got it spot on, but I'll just also add, we've frequently, we are seeing political tensions, obviously, between Israel and its neighbors, but we've always seen this quiet military cooperation that's been pushed in a bipartisan fashion for decades. And you especially saw it over the last couple of years with the interception of Iranian missiles and drones. It's this tension of the region wants stability. How do you get stability? Iran has been, I think, as we all know, a thorn. What does this all look like under these circumstances? I think you're going to have countries who want to engage, want to work, but also are very cognizant of publics and very cognizant of what's going on in Gaza too.
Several people over email are asking about Russia. Russia is in an alliance with Iran. Russia kills every day in Ukraine with Iranian drones. Can we expect that this Israeli attack may degrade Iranian possibilities to help Russia in its war against Ukraine? And if you can comment on the Russian reaction to last night. Avital, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think that first and foremost, the most important thing, that this will degrade Iranian capabilities. And that would happen for sure. I have no doubt that Iran will race to its good friend, to its buddy, Russia, in order to try and procure additional systems. Let's see what happened after the last Israeli attack in Iran several months ago. Basically, Israel crippled Iran from its air defense capabilities, making it very vulnerable. And actually, you're seeing the results today, and you'll see it in the course of the next couple of days. Iran already purchased systems to replace those who were attacked from Russia, air defense systems. These systems are still have not yet been delivered and installed. And again, Iran is vulnerable. So this bond between Iran and Russia is critical. Having said that, there are other countries in the region, for example, Egypt. And you cannot undermine Egypt's importance, a country of 105 million people, who is also sometimes finding itself based on mutual interest close to Russia. And here, the West needs to play a smart game and make sure that countries who don't always comply with the international sentiment of human rights and so on Sometimes we need some flexibility so we don't find those negative Russian influences on countries which we do care about, like Egypt, for example, and there are others. Now, Russia is out of Syria. As you know, we always said in Israel that it was bordering Israel when it was present in Syria, in the Latakia port area, and now a French company will rebuild this port. But currently in the war itself, we don't see any Russian involvement at this point of time, and I stress at this point of time because this could still change.
If I could, I don't have much to add on the Russia file, but I do want to bring in China. I'm not sure how many people saw, but earlier this month there was a big article in the Wall Street Journal about procurement of ballistic missile materials by Iran from China. And so clearly you're seeing a lot of engagement here. I was watching Barack Ravid on CNN, and he was saying that Iran had increased their their ballistic missile output from 4 or 5 a month to something like 40 to 50 a month. Clearly, this desire to ramp up production, and so a lot of big power competition going on, not only with Russia but also very much with China.
And Benji, I just want to remind the audience, and Avital made a reference to this before, but the Security Council resolution that governed the JCPOA included restrictions on ballistic missiles that expired in October of 23. So Iran has been able to again begin procuring these systems and components from China, Russia, and other places for the last almost 2 years.
Our next question is from Scott Ailman, who's wondering, how likely do you think it is that this attack, if successful, could prompt regime change?
So,
Yeah, I just want to say I certainly hope so from the inside.
yeah, I think we all hope so. Look, when you monitor the Iranian media and social media, you see a lot of pro-Israeli sentiment there. And it's not a secret that a lot of the public is, full of hate to the Iranian regime. And they are also poor. The cost of living is very high. $1 equals almost 1 million rial. Almost every week there is some kind of a protest in Tehran. Last week it was truck drivers. The week before that it was nurses. And of course, add to this the very strict modesty rules of covering the body, the head, not wearing jeans, not wearing red nail polish, and so on and so forth. And this actually makes their lives miserable. However, saying that, it's not enough because hating the regime is not sufficient to replace it. And for that, we need a lot more than just speaking on social media. All the previous attempts that began with protests, demonstrations, even with many thousands on the streets, the result was that a few people got killed by the Revolutionary Guards, and that was the end of the protests. We see the same thing in Hezbollah, by the way, with Hezbollah in Lebanon. It's the same kind of modus operandi. So at this point of time, I don't see much hope for that, but it's not inevitable. And it's enough that you have collaborators from within the Iranian army, and that could change things, but it's not around the corner.
I'll just add.
Yeah.
Please, Mark, go ahead.
Just add on to that, the people that I know, Iranians that I've met, or people who are close to Iranians for years have been telling me that the Iranian regime has lost the vast majority of the public. It does maintain power through force and intimidation, as Avital said, but it is widely hated by the Iranian population, and that disdain for the regime is spreading from university campuses, students, middle classes out into the countryside. out into the areas of Iran that were the power base of the regime 20 years ago. So there is a process underway. It's just impossible to predict at what point it cracks.
And just to add, in addition to all the major issues that Mark and Avital mentioned, also huge issues with food security in Iran, huge issues with water in Iran. These are significant issues that have been driving uncomfortable feelings, to say, for quite a while among the Iranian population.
Claire, do we have additional questions?
Sorry about that. The next question, excuse me, is from Stephen Eisen for Avital. Can you speak a little bit more about how you expect the reaction or retaliation to be different from the strikes that took place last year that briefly threatened all-out war but were eventually calmed?
So as I said, the commander of the chief of staff, the commander of the Revolutionary Guards was eliminated, and the Iranians appointed the new one, a guy by the name of Muhammad Bakur. And this is what he said an hour ago. He said that very soon we will open the gates of hell before the Zionist regime. So I've been hearing this kind of rhetoric from the Iranian leadership the entire day today. And the more I hear it, the more I understand that they're under huge amount of pressure. First of all, they didn't deliver. The launching of the drones was poorly done, and we managed to intercept almost all of them, so no damage. Thank God, no damage. And yet they haven't proved anything. Now, I want you to understand that the Israeli attack is all over Iran. So imagine the Iranian media, which is quite surprising, I have to say, which is reporting in many sites in the north, in the south, in the west, and it's overwhelming for the Iranian regime to be in this position because they always use rhetoric, and it was fine, you know, the rhetoric, we will teach them, we will show them, and so on and so forth. And that is really not the case anymore. I have no doubt, though, that they will retaliate because they still have the capabilities. They have ballistic missiles, thousands of them. So, of course, they will answer. They must do it. It's an issue of their own pride and dignity. And I'm sure it will happen in the next couple of hours, as soon as they get their act together in terms of the new leadership that steps into place, replacing the old terrorists. So it will happen for sure.
And this is behavior that we have seen from this regime in response to almost any action that is perceived against them, whether it's diplomatic, whether it is a censure, I mean, going back 10, 15 years, the immediate response from this regime is always escalation.
And you know what they said also, you're right, they said also earlier today, I think it was the foreign minister who said that the US is accountable for the current Israeli attack. And that would be interesting also vis-a-vis their reaction. Would they dare to attack US bases in the region or not? And if they do so, what will be the US reaction? Will it retaliate? Will it join? Will it still be in this position where it is today? And by the way, I do want to stress that the US is an active partner in defense of Israel for the last year, and with the Iranian attack as well.
Casey, I'll actually direct this next question to you. Many people are asking about the implications for American Jews and Jews in the diaspora in general. Have there been any threats up to this point, or any thoughts that there might be following last night's events?
Sure. Look, we know anytime there's action against Iran that it heightens the threat to Jewish Israeli targets globally. We are seeing Israeli embassies around the world change their security posture a bit, which I'm sure Avital can speak more to. Jewish communities around the world and in the United States, obviously already being in a heightened security state over the last year, and in particularly in this country, over the last few weeks. We've been in touch with security partners, both in the United States and overseas, who share the assessment that we could possibly see attacks on targets outside of Israel. So I think we urge everyone to use best practices in terms of being vigilant. AJC takes certain security precautions with our overseas staff, obviously. But as Avital said, this regime has shown it is not unwilling to retaliate on targets that are not just necessarily inside Israel. And we will obviously continue to be in close touch with authorities about the security situation. And luckily, our partner communities in Europe and overseas who have great security relationships with their federal governments are getting the increased support that they need. And obviously, for those who have family or friends who might be in Israel right now visiting, I saw we had some questions in the chat about that. Obviously, we're going to have to wait and see what happens with the resumption of flights and the reopening of airspace. But obviously, we just encourage everyone to follow the government instructions about sheltering. As Avital explained in the beginning, there is home front procedure, and the best advice I think we can give at this point is to just continue following your local law enforcement guidelines.
Thank you. Our last question is from Daniel Laurer, who's saying, now that the Iranian nuclear program is finally being disabled, is there a long-term plan to keep it that way, or other strategies to prevent Iran from starting over, whether through diplomatic deterrence or even on-the-ground operations?
I don't think that in the Middle East, I would put my bet on anything with a long range. But, and there's a but here, at the end of the day, we in AJC are trying to promote and expand the Abraham Accords. And this would have a significant impact on the entire region in the Middle East. And this will also sideline countries like Iran and Libya and Algeria and other like-minded partners countries. And so we need to aspire for that, because we, Israel, have a lot of partners with a lot of joint interests. And even if our Arab partners around the world will not speak publicly about it, I'm sure that inside a closed room, they're so excited that Israel is doing what it's doing. And by the way, we may pay a price for it here, but we really reached a point of no return. The chief of staff of the Israeli Defense Forces said today, we are at the point of no return. Now, we cannot afford just, to publish another report like the IAEA does, another report. And then in August, there was another report, and a few months before that. We cannot do that because it's our lives and the existence of the country. It's your country too. So I want you to really be mindful of the necessity to act specifically now, the option that Israel could not delay it. We could not delay the attack. So I'm hoping that after crippling Iran from its nuclear capabilities, we'll see a different Middle East. Now, does this mean that Iran will never, ever try to rebuild a nuclear arsenal? Sure, it may. Depending, of course, on who will be the regime, of course. And will it be the regime that we saw before 1979 or after? Everybody living here in Israel is an optimist, and I'm not an exclusion for that. And I know that we will suffer here. Tough days ahead, but I know that the outcome will be better, not just for the Middle East and Israel, but for the world, because the world does not need and cannot afford a nuclear Iran led by this horrific regime, which glorifies murder and death and those kind of values.
Avital, thank you. That's such an important point for us to conclude on. Again, reminding the world that while Iran poses an existential threat to Israel, it poses a severe threat to global security. Iran has attacked in Europe, in Latin America. It has tried to plot attacks in the United States. This is not just Israel's issue. We are so grateful, Avital, to you for joining us. Thank you for your service. Stay safe. Thank you to Mark and Benji for joining us. And Claire, I will turn it back to you to conclude the program.
Thank you all for sharing your expertise on today's AJC Advocacy Anywhere program, and thank you to our global audience for tuning in. To stay up to date on the evolving situation, make sure to follow AJC on social media at AJC Global. You can also find more resources at ajc.org/Israel at War, and you can take action at ajc.org/Stand Against Iran. Our hearts are in Israel today and every day. I'm Yisrael Chai. Thank you.